The detention cell hummed with the low frequency of the ship's engines, a sound that had become Marcus Chen's constant companion for the past 3 months. The transparent aluminum walls offered no privacy, allowing the Vorthak guards to observe his every movement. They found him fascinating. These reptilian beings with their scaled skin and cold, calculating eyes. To them, he was an anomaly, a human who had somehow survived encounters that should have killed him a dozen times over. Marcus sat cross-legged on the narrow bunk, his dark hair grown longer than regulation allowed, his beard unkempt. The orange prisoner's uniform hung loose on his frame, evidence of the meager rations they provided. But his eyes remained sharp, alert, constantly scanning his surroundings, even after months of confinement. The Vorthak thought they had trapped him, but Marcus knew better. He was exactly where he needed to be. The war between humanity and the Vorthak Dominion had raged for 7 years now. It began when human colonists stumbled upon a Vorthak mining operation in what they thought was unclaimed space. First contact had gone poorly. Translation errors, cultural misunderstandings, and trigger-happy soldiers on both sides had escalated a simple territorial dispute into a full-scale galactic conflict. The Vorthak, with their superior technology and ruthless efficiency, had initially dominated the early battles. Human worlds fell like dominoes, their populations either enslaved or eliminated. But humans were adaptable. They learned quickly, improvised constantly, and refused to surrender even when facing impossible odds. What the Vorthak saw as primitive stubbornness, humanity called resilience. Marcus embodied this trait more than most. He had been a lieutenant in the Human Colonial Defense Force when the war began. Fresh out of the academy, full of idealism and military precision, the first battle changed all that. Watching his unit get torn apart by Vorthak plasma cannons, seeing his commanding officer vaporized before his eyes, had stripped away his illusions about glory and honor. War was survival, nothing more, and Marcus discovered he was exceptionally good at surviving. The cell door's energy field shimmered and died with a characteristic whine. 2 Vorthak guards entered, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Between them walked Commander Sarek, the ship's commanding officer. His scales were a deeper green than the others, marked with the gold striping that indicated his noble birth. A translator device hung around his thick neck, converting his hissing speech into standard galactic. Human Marcus Chen. Sarek's translated voice carried none of the subtle inflections of his native tongue. Today you will speak with Interrogator Prime, HFY. She has traveled far to meet you. Marcus looked up from his meditation pose but didn't stand. Small acts of defiance were all he had left, or so the Vorthak believed. Another interrogation? I'm flattered by all the attention, but my answers haven't changed in 3 months. Sarek's inner eyelids flicked the Vorthak equivalent of a dismissive blink. This one is different. HFY does not seek military intelligence. She studies your species. She wishes to understand how you continue to function after witnessing so much death. That got Marcus's attention. The Vorthak were pragmatic to a fault, viewing psychology as an inefficient science. If they were bringing in a specialist, something had changed. He stood slowly, letting them think the movement pained him more than it did. Lead the way, he said. The walk through the ship's corridors revealed more than his captors probably intended. Marcus counted guard stations, noted security checkpoint protocols, and memorized the layout. The vessel was a Dominion-class cruiser, built for long-range operations, and equipped with enough firepower to level a small city. Its crew of 3,000 made it one of the smaller ships in the Vorthak fleet, but still formidable by human standards. They passed other prisoners being escorted to various destinations. Most were human, their faces bearing the hollow expression of those who had given up hope. A few were from other species caught in the crossfire of the war, blue-skinned Arcturians, the insectoid Klaxi, even a pair of energy beings that shimmered in containment suits. The galaxy had chosen sides, and most had chosen poorly. The interrogation chamber was smaller than Marcus expected, barely large enough for a table and 2 chairs. The walls were lined with recording equipment and neural scanners, machines designed to detect deception and measure psychological responses. Sitting across from the empty chair was something Marcus had never seen before. Vexhai was old, even by Vorthak standards. Her scales had lost their lustrous shine, taking on the pale gray of advanced age, but her eyes burned with intelligence and curiosity that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of his grandmother. She wore the dark robes of the psychological sciences caste, marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Marcus Chen," she said without the aid of a translator, her English accented but clear. "Please, sit. I have been studying your language for many cycles. I find it expressive." Marcus settled into the chair, noting that it had been adjusted for human proportions. Another sign that this interrogation would be different. "You speak it well. Better than most humans." Honestly, Vexhai made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your species fascinates me. We have fought 17 different races in our expansion across the galaxy. All of them followed predictable patterns when facing defeat. They either surrendered quickly to preserve their lives, or fought desperately until the last of their kind perished. Humans do neither. We're stubborn that way. Stubborn, yes, but more than that. You adapt. You learn. You take our weapons and find ways to use them against us. Most curious of all, you seem to grow stronger the more losses you endure. It defies all psychological models." Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to appear relaxed. "Maybe your models are wrong." Vexhai activated a holographic display, showing Marcus's service record. Images of battles, casualty reports, and psychological evaluations floated in the air between them. "You have personally witnessed the deaths of over 400 of your fellow soldiers. By our calculations, a mind exposed to such trauma should have collapsed into catatonia or aggressive psychosis. Yet here you sit, calm and rational. You want to know what makes us tick? I want to understand what makes you dangerous." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the alien psychologist. She was fishing for something specific, not just general information about human psychology. The fact that they'd brought her here, to interrogate him personally, suggested they'd encountered something that scared them. "Good. You're losing the war," he said finally. Vexhai's head tilted slightly. A gesture he'd learned indicated surprise. "Our forces control 60% of the contested systems. Your fleets retreat before our advance. How do you conclude we are losing?" "Because you're here, talking to a captured lieutenant instead of planning victory parades. Because you've had to bring in specialists to figure out why we won't break. Because every day this war continues, more species start to wonder if the mighty Vorthak Dominion might actually be beatable." The old alien was quiet for several minutes, her clawed fingers drumming against the table's surface. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight it hadn't before. 3 months ago, a single human ship destroyed a Dominion fleet of 27 vessels. The human captain had watched his homeworld burn, his family die, his entire civilization crumble. By every psychological metric we possess, he should have been broken. Instead, he became something else entirely, something we do not understand. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He knew which battle she was referring to. The siege of New Geneva had been a disaster for humanity, until Captain Sarah Mitchell turned her crippled destroyer into a weapon of unprecedented destruction. The official reports said she'd rigged the ship's fusion reactors to create a cascade explosion. But there had been rumors of something more. Something impossible. "Captain Mitchell was a hero," he said carefully. "Captain Mitchell died 3 times during that battle," Vexhai replied, her words hitting Marcus like physical blows. "Our sensors recorded her life signs failing completely. Her ship's life support systems going offline. Her body temperature dropping to levels incompatible with human survival. Yet each time, she returned. Each time, she became more dangerous." The interrogation chamber felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in around Marcus. Death wasn't supposed to work that way. When someone died, they stayed dead. That was one of the universe's most fundamental rules. But he'd heard the stories from other survivors, whispered accounts of soldiers who'd taken wounds that should have killed them, only to rise again with their eyes burning with something that wasn't quite human anymore. "You're saying she came back from the dead?" I am saying your species has developed an ability that violates everything we know about biology and physics. When pushed to the absolute limit, when facing complete annihilation, some humans appear to transcend death itself. They return changed, enhanced, driven by something beyond normal survival instinct. Marcus tried to keep his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. He thought about the Battle of Kepler Station, where he'd watched Sergeant Rodriguez take a plasma blast to the chest and keep fighting. About Lieutenant Commander Park, who'd been spaced during a boarding action, but somehow made it back to the ship's airlock. About his own experiences. The moments when everything had gone black, but he'd awakened to find himself still breathing, still fighting, with memory gaps he couldn't explain. Even if that were true, he said slowly, what makes you think I know anything about it? Vex High manipulated the holographic display, bringing up a detailed scan of Marcus's body. The image showed his skeleton, organs, and circulatory system in perfect detail. But there were anomalies, dark spots throughout his nervous system, areas where the scanner couldn't penetrate. Because, Marcus Chen, our sensors indicate you have died and returned no fewer than 7 times since your capture. Each death lasted between 30 seconds and 4 minutes. Each time, you returned with no memory of the experience. Your guards assume you simply sleep deeply, but we know better. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the scan, seeing the evidence of something he couldn't remember, couldn't understand. The dark spots in his nervous system pulsed slightly, as if responding to his attention. That's impossible, he whispered. Is it? Or is it simply the next step in your species' evolution? An adaptation born of necessity, triggered by the extreme stresses of war? Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the far wall of the small chamber. His mind reeled with implications. If humans were somehow developing the ability to return from death, if this was becoming more common throughout the war, it changed everything. No wonder the Vorthok were worried. How do you fight an enemy that won't stay dead? What do you want from me? He asked. Cooperation. Help us understand this phenomenon. If we can comprehend how your species has developed this ability, perhaps we can find ways to counter it. In exchange, I offer you something your people have never possessed: the truth about yourselves. Marcus turned back to face the alien psychologist. And if I refuse? Then you will remain here until we find other subjects to study. But I think you will cooperate, Marcus Chen. Because like all humans, you cannot resist the desire to understand. It is both your greatest strength and your most exploitable weakness. The interrogation continued for hours. Vex High, probing with questions that seemed designed to trigger specific memories or responses. Marcus found himself talking about battles he'd tried to forget. Moments of terror and loss that had shaped him into what he was now. But there were gaps in his recollection. Spaces where time seemed to skip forward without explanation. When the session finally ended, Marcus was escorted back to his cell with more questions than answers. He lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, and trying to piece together fragments of memory, flashes of darkness, moments of absolute cold, and always the sense of something vast and patient waiting just beyond the edge of perception. The Vorthak thought they had him trapped, a specimen to be studied and dissected. They had no idea that every day he spent in their custody, every interrogation session with Vex High, brought him closer to understanding something that would change the war forever. Death was no longer the end for humanity. It had become something else entirely, a doorway to power they were only beginning to comprehend. As sleep finally claimed him, Marcus felt that familiar sensation of falling into darkness. But this time, instead of the peaceful oblivion he expected, he sensed something stirring in the depths, something that had been waiting for him to acknowledge its presence, something that whispered promises of vengeance and victory in a voice that sounded disturbingly like his own. The war was about to change in ways neither side could imagine. Marcus awoke to the sound of alarms blaring throughout the ship. Red emergency lights bathed his cell in an ominous glow, and he could feel the subtle vibration that indicated the vessel was changing course rapidly. Through the transparent walls, he watched Vorthak crew members rushing past in organized panic, their scaled faces tight with concern. The ship shuddered as something impacted the hull. Marcus had felt enough weapons fire during the war to recognize the distinctive tremor of plasma cannon strikes. They were under attack. But by whom? Human forces in this sector had been decimated months ago, scattered to the four winds after the fall of the Kepler defense line. Commander Sarek appeared at his cell door, flanked by 4 guards instead of the usual 2. The Vorthak officer's usual composure had cracked slightly, revealing the stress beneath his professional demeanor. "You will come with us." The translator rendered his hissing speech into flat, emotionless words. "Interrogator Prime Vex High requires your presence immediately." "What's the situation?" Marcus asked, as the energy field containing him flickered off. "Pirates? Rebels? Questions are not permitted," Sarek replied. But Marcus caught the slight hesitation before the words. The commander was scared. And that was interesting. It took a lot to rattle a veteran Vorthak officer. They moved through corridors filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burned circuitry. Damage control teams worked frantically to repair systems that sparked and hissed with electrical failures. Whatever was attacking them was doing serious damage to what should have been an impregnable fortress. As they passed a junction leading to the ship's observation deck, Marcus glimpsed something through the reinforced windows that made his blood run cold. Ships hung in space around the Vorthak cruiser, human ships. But not like any he'd seen before. These vessels were wrong somehow, their hulls twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. They moved with fluid grace that defied physics, flowing around the cruiser's defensive fire like liquid mercury. "God in heaven," Marcus whispered. "What are those things?" Sarek followed his gaze and his inner eyelids flickered rapidly. "Your people call them the returned fleet, ships crewed by those who have died and come back. They appeared 3 days ago and have been hunting our vessels throughout this sector." The returned fleet. Marcus had heard whispers of it in the detention block. Stories passed between prisoners who claimed to have seen impossible things. Ships that appeared from nowhere, crewed by humans who moved like sleepwalkers and spoke in voices like winter wind. Most had dismissed it as propaganda or hallucination brought on by trauma and captivity. They reached the interrogation chamber to find it transformed into something resembling a war room. Holographic displays showed the tactical situation in real time, 12 human ships surrounding the Vorthak cruiser, their formations shifting in patterns that seemed almost organic. Vex High stood at the center of it all, her aged hands dancing over control interfaces as she coordinated the ship's response. "Ah, Marcus," she said without turning around. "Perfect timing. Your fleet has come to rescue you." "That's not my fleet," Marcus replied, studying the displays with growing unease. "I don't know what those things are, but they're not human. Not anymore." Vex High finally faced him, her ancient eyes reflecting the red emergency lighting. "Oh. But they are. Every ship out there is crewed by humans who died in previous battles. Humans who refuse to accept death as an ending. They have become something new, something that exists in the spaces between life and death." Another impact shook the ship, stronger than before. On the tactical display, one of the human vessels had closed to point-blank range, its weapons tearing through the cruiser's shields like paper. But more disturbing than their firepower was their coordination. They moved as if controlled by a single mind, anticipating each other's actions with inhuman precision. "Why are you showing me this?" Marcus demanded. "Because," Vex High said, "we need to understand what your species has become. And more importantly, we need to know if you can control them." Before Marcus could respond, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later. But in that brief darkness, he felt something that made his skin crawl. A presence, vast and patient, pressing against the edges of his consciousness. It whispered his name in voices he recognized: Sarah Mitchell, James Rodriguez, Linda Park, and dozens of others. The dead, calling to him across the void. "They're here," he said without thinking. The chamber's main door exploded inward, the blast wave sending Vorthak guards sprawling. Through the smoke and debris, figures began to emerge. They wore the remnants of human military uniforms, but their faces were wrong, too pale. Eyes that reflected light like mirrors, expressions frozen in eternal calm. They moved with mechanical precision, their steps perfectly synchronized. Leading them was a woman Marcus recognized. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway, her dress uniform immaculate despite the fact that she should have been vaporized along with her ship 3 months ago. Her eyes found his across the chaos, and when she smiled, it was with genuine warmth that made the situation even more terrifying. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in his bones. "We've been looking for you." The Vorthak guards opened fire, their plasma rifles sending bolts of superheated energy toward the intruders. The beams struck the returned humans, but passed through them as if they were made of mist. Then the figures solidified again, weapons materializing in their hands, rifles that crackled with dark energy, ammunition that seemed to be made of crystallized shadow. What followed wasn't a battle so much as an execution. The returned humans moved with inhuman coordination, their weapons cutting through Vorthak armor as if it were paper. They showed no emotion as they killed, no satisfaction or anger, just the methodical efficiency of machines built for destruction. Vexai grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "You must stop them. They will kill everyone aboard this ship." "I don't know how," Marcus shouted back, watching as Commander Sarek tried to retreat toward an emergency exit, only to find another group of returned humans blocking his path. "I don't understand what's happening." "Then learn quickly," the old psychologist hissed. "Because this is only the beginning. Your species is evolving, Marcus Chen, and unless someone learns to guide that evolution, it will consume everything human and alien alike." Captain Mitchell approached them, stepping over the bodies of fallen Vorthak guards without acknowledgement. Her movements were too fluid, lacking the small imperfections that marked living beings. When she spoke, other voices seemed to whisper along with hers. "Marcus, it's time to come home. The fleet is waiting for you." "Sarah, what happened to you? How are you here?" Her head tilted slightly, the gesture eerily reminiscent of the old Sarah but wrong in subtle ways. "I died, Marcus. We all died. But death isn't the end anymore. It's a doorway to something greater, something necessary." Around the chamber, the returned humans had finished eliminating the Vorthak guards. They stood in perfect formation, weapons at ready, waiting for orders that would come from somewhere beyond ordinary command structure. Their eyes all reflected the same strange light, the same patient intelligence. "This isn't right," Marcus said, backing away from his former captain. "Death should be final, natural." "Natural?" Sarah's laugh was like breaking glass. "Was it natural for the Vorthak to burn our worlds? To slaughter our families? Nature failed us, Marcus. So we became something more than natural." She extended her hand toward him, and Marcus could see that her fingers were slightly translucent, as if she were only partially present in the physical world. "Join us. Stop fighting what you've already become." "I haven't become anything." "Haven't you?" Sarah gestured to Vexai, who was still clutching diagnostic equipment. "Show him the scans from your latest interrogation." The alien psychologist's hands shook as she activated a portable display. The holographic image that appeared showed Marcus's body in real time, but the scanning was deeper than before, revealing cellular-level detail. What he saw made him stagger backward. His nervous system was shot through with veins of something that wasn't quite matter, threads of darkness that pulsed with their own rhythm. His brain showed similar structures, shadow pathways that connected to regions that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. Most disturbing of all, his heart had a secondary chamber that seemed to exist in a different dimensional space entirely. "You've died 7 times since your capture," Sarah explained gently. "Each death has strengthened your connection to what lies beyond. Each return has made you more like us." Marcus stared at his own impossible anatomy, trying to deny what the evidence clearly showed. But as he watched, the dark structures in his nervous system pulsed in sync with his heartbeat, and he felt an answering resonance from the returned humans around him. "This is what your species is becoming," Vexai said quietly. "Not just the ability to return from death, but to exist simultaneously in life and death, to draw power from the spaces between existence." "But why?" Marcus demanded. "What's the purpose?" Sarah's expression grew serious, and for a moment she looked almost like her old self. Because the war isn't just between humans and Vorthak anymore, Marcus. There are things in the deep spaces between galaxies, ancient powers that view both our species as threats to their dominion. They've been moving pieces into position for millennia, waiting for the right moment to strike. She gestured toward the tactical displays, which now showed something that made Marcus's blood freeze. Beyond the local system's edge, something vast was moving through space, a structure so large it dwarfed entire planets. Its surface writhed with impossible geometry, patterns that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. The Devourer, Sarah whispered. It comes to harvest the galaxy, to feed on the life force of every thinking being. The Vorthak don't know it yet, but their expansion has caught its attention. Their psychic emanations have been calling to it for decades. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. The war, the evolution of humanity, the development of abilities that transcended death itself, it was all connected. His species wasn't just adapting to conflict with the Vorthak. They were preparing for something far worse. So we become living weapons, he said. Soldiers who can't truly die. We become necessary, Sarah corrected. The universe is vast and full of wonders, but it's also home to things that would destroy everything we cherish. Someone has to stand guard. Someone has to be willing to pay any price to protect what matters. The ship shuddered again, but this time it wasn't from weapons fire. Through the chamber's windows, Marcus could see space itself beginning to ripple and bend. The Devourer was still light years away, but its gravitational influence was already beginning to distort local space-time. The choice is yours, Sarah said, extending her hand again. Join us willingly and retain some measure of who you were. Fight the change, and it will happen anyway. But you'll lose yourself in the process. Marcus looked around the ruined interrogation chamber, at the dead Vorthak guards and the impossible humans who had killed them. He thought about the war, about the friends he'd lost, about the worlds that had burned while politicians and generals played games with lives they'd never counted as real. But mostly he thought about that thing moving through space toward them. That avatar of hunger and destruction that would devour everything he'd ever cared about if it wasn't stopped. If I do this, he said slowly, what happens to the person I am now? Sarah's smile was sad but genuine. He becomes part of something larger, a guardian of existence itself. Is that such a terrible fate? Marcus reached out and took her translucent hand. The moment their fingers touched, cold fire raced through his nervous system. The dark structures in his body flared to life, connecting him to a network of consciousness that spanned star systems. He felt the presence of thousands of returned humans, all linked by bonds that transcended physical space. And in that moment of connection, he understood. This wasn't death or undeath, it was evolution. Humanity had faced annihilation and emerged as something capable of protecting the universe from threats that existed beyond conventional reality. They had become the immune system of existence itself. The transformation was beginning, and there was no turning back. The transformation felt like drowning in reverse. Instead of air leaving his lungs, something vast and cold filled them. Marcus gasped as his consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his physical form, touching minds across the galaxy. He felt Sarah's presence beside him, solid and reassuring, while thousands of other returned humans formed a network of shared experience and purpose. Through their collective awareness, he saw the war as it truly was, not the simple territorial conflict the politicians had painted it as, but a desperate race against time. The Vorthak Dominion's expansion had indeed attracted the attention of something ancient and hungry. The Devourer wasn't just another threat, it was extinction personified, a force that had consumed entire galactic clusters before turning its attention to their small corner of the universe. The connection is stabilizing, Sarah observed, her voice now speaking directly into his mind. How do you feel? Marcus examined his transformed body with senses he hadn't possessed minutes earlier. His physical form remained largely unchanged, but he could perceive structures that existed in higher dimensions. The shadow pathways in his nervous system pulsed with energy drawn from the spaces between life and death, making him stronger, faster, and more resilient than any baseline human. Different, he replied. But still me, somehow. That's the key to maintaining sanity through the process. another voice added. This one belonged to Commander Park, the officer he'd seen spaced during a boarding action. She materialized beside them, her form flickering between solid matter and something resembling living starlight. We're still human at our core. We just have access to capabilities our species never developed naturally. Vex-High had retreated to the far corner of the chamber, her diagnostic equipment recording everything. Her ancient eyes held a mixture of terror and fascination as she watched Marcus complete his transformation. Remarkable, she whispered. Your neural patterns are maintaining coherence despite existing partially outside normal space-time. How is this possible? Because humanity refused to accept limitations, Sarah answered. When faced with extinction, element to be, most species either surrender or fight to the last individual. Humans found a third option, transcendence. The Vorthak psychologist activated a communication array, sending a transmission toward the ship's command center. This is Interrogator Prime Vex-High. I am declaring a temporary ceasefire with the human boarding parties. Repeat, all Vorthak forces are to stand down until further notice. Marcus was impressed by the alien's pragmatism, even in the face of forces she clearly didn't understand. Smart choice. We're not here to destroy your ship. Then what do you want? Vex-High demanded. Sarah gestured toward the tactical displays, where the massive shape of the Devourer continued its inexorable approach. Your people need to understand what's coming. This war between our species is meaningless compared to the threat that approaches. On the displays, long-range sensors were beginning to detect the true scale of the approaching entity. The Devourer wasn't just a large ship or space station, it was a living construct the size of a small moon, its surface covered in organs that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. Smaller entities swarmed around it like antibodies, each one capable of sterilizing an entire planet. What is that thing? Vex-High asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The last of the Void Shapers, Marcus replied, the knowledge flowing through the network connection. An ancient race that consumed their own galaxy before moving on to devour others. They exist partially outside normal space-time, feeding on the life force of entire civilizations. The returned humans began moving with renewed purpose, their forms becoming more solid as they prepared for what was coming. Through the ship's corridors, Marcus could sense similar transformations occurring throughout the Vorthak vessel. Human prisoners were awakening to their true nature, their deaths in battle having prepared them for this moment. How long do we have? Vex-High asked. 6 days, Sarah replied. Maybe 7 if we're lucky. After that, it will arrive in this system and begin the harvesting process. The alien psychologist was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Our fleets cannot stand against something of that magnitude. Even united, the combined forces of the Dominion and your colonial defense force would be insufficient, which is why the returned exist, Marcus said, feeling the certainty of purpose flow through him. We're not bound by normal physical limitations. We can fight in ways that conventional forces cannot. Through the network, he began to understand the full scope of what humanity had become. Across dozens of star systems, returned humans were awakening in Vorthok prison ships, in hidden bases, in the ruins of destroyed colonies. They were the survivors of every major battle of the war, soldiers who had died and chosen to return rather than accept defeat. But they were more than just undead warriors. Each returned human maintained a connection to the spaces between dimensions, allowing them to draw on energies that didn't exist in normal reality. They could phase through solid matter, manipulate probability fields, and most importantly, they could perceive and interact with entities like the Devourer. The transformation process is accelerating, Commander Park reported. We're detecting awakening events across 17 sectors. The network is expanding faster than projected. Marcus felt it too, a growing web of consciousness that connected every returned human across the galaxy. They shared knowledge instantaneously, coordinated actions across impossible distances, and drew strength from their collective will to protect everything they held dear. This is what the war was really about, he realized. Not territory or resources, but preparing humanity for what was coming. Sarah nodded. The Devourer's approach triggered something in our species' collective unconscious. We began developing the abilities we'd need to fight it, but only under extreme stress. The war with the Vorthak provided that stress. A new voice joined their conversation, gruff, familiar, and impossible. About time you figured it out, Chen. Marcus spun around to see Sergeant Rodriguez materializing beside them. The man who'd been his mentor during basic training looked exactly as he had the day he'd died at Kepler Station. Except for his eyes, they held depths that hadn't existed in life. Wisdom gained from experiences beyond normal existence. Sarge? But you died months ago. Death's just a temporary inconvenience these days, Rodriguez grinned. Been waiting for you to join the party. We've got a war to fight, and this time we're not going to lose. Through the ship's communication system, they could hear the Vorthak crew receiving updates from their command structure. Reports were coming in from across the dominion of human prisoners, spontaneously developing superhuman abilities, of destroyed human vessels, reappearing in perfect condition, of soldiers thought dead for months walking out of the deep vacuum of space. The situation is becoming untenable, HFY observed. My government will never accept an alliance with a species they view as an existential threat. They'll accept it when the alternative becomes clear, Sarah replied. Show them. The tactical displays shifted to show long-range sensor data from multiple star systems. In each case, the pattern was the same. Vorthak expansion fleets had encountered something that destroyed them completely, leaving nothing but empty space where once thriving colonies had existed. The Devourer's advanced scouts were already at work, preparing the way for the main entity's arrival. Harvester drones, Marcus identified, the knowledge flowing through the network connection. They consume all biological matter and convert it into energy for the main entity. Every world they touch becomes lifeless rock. HFY's hands trembled as she studied the data. 3 billion Vorthak died in the Keltar system alone. Our most advanced defensive systems couldn't even slow these creatures. Now you understand why we evolved, Rodriguez said. Conventional weapons, conventional tactics, conventional thinking, none of it works against entities that exist partially outside reality. You need soldiers who can follow them into those spaces. The chamber's main display activated, showing a communication from the ship's bridge. Commander Sarek appeared on the screen, his scales darker than usual with stress. Behind him, Marcus could see Vorthak crew members working frantically at their stations. Interrogator Prime HFY. Sarek's translator rendered his agitated speech into flat words. We are receiving priority communications from High Command. The Dominion Council has authorized emergency protocols. They wish to speak with you immediately about accommodation with the humans. Tell them I'm conducting final interviews with our subjects, HFY replied. And Commander? Begin preparations for a full data upload to the homeworld. Everything we've learned about human evolution needs to reach the Council. Before we proceed, the communication ended, leaving them in relative quiet. Around them, the returned humans maintained their positions, but Marcus could sense their attention focused on something beyond the ship's immediate vicinity. Through their shared perception, he became aware of massive structures moving through hyperspace. The returned fleet was repositioning for something significant. What's the plan? He asked Sarah. First, we need to convince the Vorthak that cooperation isn't just beneficial, it's the only path to survival for both our species. Then we need to prepare them for what's coming. And if they refuse? Sarah's expression grew cold, and for a moment, Marcus glimpsed the terrible purpose that drove the returned humans. Then we save who we can, and let natural selection take its course. Through the network, Marcus felt the weight of thousands of minds focused on a single goal, the preservation of sapient life in the galaxy. The returned humans had transcended the limitations of their individual mortality, but they had not abandoned their fundamental humanity. They still cared about protecting the innocent, still felt loyalty to their species, still believed that some things were worth any sacrifice. But they had also gained a perspective that extended beyond normal human concerns. They could see the universe as it truly was, vast, dangerous, and filled with entities that viewed sapient life as nothing more than food. In the face of such cosmic horror, the war between humans and Vorthak seemed almost trivial. The network is detecting multiple breakthrough events in this sector, Commander Park reported. Vorthak prisoner ships throughout the region are experiencing similar situations to ours. Marcus understood what that meant. Across the galaxy, returned humans were awakening and beginning the process of converting their former enemies into allies. It wouldn't be easy. Centuries of cultural differences and recent warfare had created deep suspicions between the species, but necessity would drive cooperation in ways that diplomacy never could. "How many of us are there now?" he asked. "Over 50,000 confirmed returns," Sarah replied. "The number grows daily as more humans die and choose to come back. But that's not enough to face what's coming. So what do we need?" "Everything," Rodriguez said grimly. "Every ship, every weapon, every tactical advantage we can muster. And most importantly, we need the Vorthok to understand that their choice isn't between independence and surrender. It's between cooperation and extinction." The transformation had given Marcus abilities he was still learning to comprehend, but it had also burdened him with knowledge of the stakes involved. The Devourer wasn't just another enemy to be defeated. It was a force that had successfully consumed dozens of galaxies over cosmic time. The only reason it hadn't reached this region sooner was the vast distances involved and the time needed to fully digest its previous conquests. Now it was here, and the galaxy's two most advanced species would need to combine their strengths in ways that neither had thought possible. The returned humans provided capabilities that transcended normal physics, but they would need the Vorthak's technological sophistication and industrial capacity to create weapons capable of harming entities that existed between dimensions. The war was about to enter a phase that would test both species' capacity for adaptation and cooperation, and Marcus Chen, once a simple lieutenant in the Colonial Defense Force, would find himself at the center of humanity's most desperate gamble. The Vorthok homeworld of Sector Prime sprawled across the surface of a planet that had been completely transformed by millennia of industrial development. Crystalline spires reached toward the pale green sky, connected by transit tubes that carried millions of citizens through the carefully planned urban landscape. It was a monument to order, efficiency, and the absolute certainty that the Dominion represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization. That certainty was being challenged in ways the Vorthak leadership had never imagined. Marcus stood in the center of the High Council chamber, surrounded by the most powerful individuals in the Dominion. The returned humans had traveled here not through conventional space travel, but by stepping through dimensional rifts that connected distant points across the galaxy. It was just one of many abilities that had convinced the Vorthak that their former enemies had become something beyond normal understanding. The council chamber itself was impressive, a vast, domed space with walls that displayed real-time information from across the Dominion. Star charts, fleet positions, resource allocations, and casualty reports created a constant flow of data that the council members processed with the efficiency of living computers. But today, all of those displays showed the same thing. Systems going dark, as the Devourer's advanced scouts continued their methodical extermination of sapient life. High Archon Kessisvel stood at the chamber's apex, her ancient scales marked with the ritual scarring that indicated supreme authority. She was old even by Vorthak standards, having ruled the Dominion for over 2 centuries. Her inner eyelids flicked constantly as she processed the impossible information the humans had provided. "You claim this entity has consumed 47 galaxies," she said, her translator struggling to convey the emotional undertones of her speech. "The mathematical implications alone suggest a timeline that predates our species' evolution." End quote. "The Void Shapers were ancient when your sun was still forming," Sarah Mitchell replied. She stood beside Marcus, her form flickering occasionally between solid matter and something resembling crystallized light. "They exist partially outside linear time, which allows them to consume entire galactic clusters without aging in the conventional sense." Fleet Commander Thexman, a grizzled veteran covered in battle scars, leaned forward in his ceremonial armor. "Our simulations indicate that even with the combined fleets of the Dominion, we cannot generate sufficient firepower to damage something of this magnitude. Your human vessels are small and lightly armed. How do you propose to engage such an enemy?" Marcus stepped forward, allowing the council to see the transformation that had overcome him. His physical appearance remained largely human, but energy patterns visible to Vorthok sensors revealed the exotic structures that now comprised his enhanced physiology. "We don't fight it with conventional weapons," he explained. The Devourer exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Normal matter can't harm it because most of the entity exists outside spaces where physics work the way you understand them, but the returned humans can follow it into those spaces. He gestured to Sarah, who allowed her form to shift into its true state. She became translucent, her outline flickering as she existed simultaneously in several dimensional phases. Weapons materialized in her hands, rifles that seemed to be carved from crystallized darkness, ammunition that appeared to be made of solidified void. "We've learned to weaponize the spaces between existence," she said. "Each returned human can channel energies that don't exist in normal reality. When we coordinate our efforts, we can create effects that transcend conventional physics." The demonstration that followed left the Vorthak Council in stunned silence. Sarah raised one of her dimensional weapons and fired at a reinforced section of the chamber wall. The beam that emerged was barely visible, but where it struck, reality itself seemed to fray. The wall didn't explode or melt, it simply ceased to exist, leaving a perfectly spherical void that hurt to look at directly. "The ammunition draws from the same dimensional spaces that the Devourer inhabits," Marcus explained. "It's one of the few things that can actually damage entities like the Void Shapers." Archon Kessisvel was quiet for a long moment, her aged mind processing implications that challenged everything the Dominion thought it knew about the universe. "How many of your returned humans currently exist?" "Over 90,000 confirmed," Sarah replied. "The number increases daily as more humans undergo the transformation. But that's still not enough to face what's coming." "Then what do you propose?" Marcus had been preparing for this moment since his transformation began. The plan that had emerged from the collective consciousness of the returned humans was ambitious, dangerous, and their only realistic chance of survival. "We need to accelerate the process," he said. "Not just for humans, but for Vorthak as well." The chamber erupted in hisses of outrage and alarm. Several council members rose from their seats, their scales darkening with emotion. The concept of voluntarily undergoing the kind of transformation that had created the returned humans was apparently unthinkable to the Vorthak mind. "Impossible," Fleet Commander Thexman declared. "The Vorthak are a stable species. We do not undergo radical evolutionary changes." "You will if you want to survive," another voice said. Commander Rodriguez materialized beside Marcus, his gruff demeanor unchanged by his transformation into something beyond normal existence. "The Devourer doesn't care about your stability or your traditions. It cares about converting your life force into energy." High Archon Kessvel raised a clawed hand for silence. "Explain this process. How would such a transformation be accomplished?" Sarah activated a holographic display that showed detailed scans of human and Vorthak physiology. "The transformation requires exposure to extreme stress combined with voluntary death and return. For humans, this was triggered by the desperation of warfare. For Vorthak, we would need to create similar conditions in a controlled environment." "You're talking about deliberately killing members of our species," Science Coordinator Melthara observed. Her scales had taken on the pale blue coloration that indicated scientific fascination. "The ethical implications alone are irrelevant compared to the alternative," Marcus interrupted. "In 4 days, the Devourer will reach this system. Its harvester drones will strip every planet bare of biological matter. Your ethical concerns won't matter to an entity that views sapient life as fuel." The tactical displays throughout the chamber updated with new information. Long-range sensors had detected the main entity emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge. It was even larger than previous estimates had suggested, not moon-sized, but approaching the scale of a small planet. Organic structures covered its surface, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to induce madness in anyone who stared at them too long. "Dear ancestors," Archon Kessisvel whispered. "It's beautiful. Don't look directly at it," Sarah warned sharply. "The Void Shapers use hypnotic patterns to pacify prey species. Several Vorthak monitoring stations have already gone silent after their crews became entranced." The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy as the reality of their situation settled over the council. They were facing an enemy that operated beyond their understanding, using weapons and tactics that transcended conventional warfare. Their only allies were a species they'd been fighting for years, beings who had voluntarily abandoned their humanity to become something capable of fighting cosmic horror. "What exactly are you proposing?" Fleet Commander Thexman asked. Marcus exchanged glances with his fellow returned humans. They had debated this moment through the network connection, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. The plan they developed would require trust from both species and sacrifices that neither had contemplated. "We established joint transformation facilities on 12 key worlds," he said. "Volunteers from both species undergo controlled death and return under supervision from experienced returned humans. The process is dangerous. Not everyone survives the transformation, but it's the only way to create enough enhanced individuals to fight the Devourer." "How many volunteers would be needed?" Science Coordinator Melthara asked. "At minimum, 1 million enhanced beings," Sarah replied. "Ideally, closer to 5 million. The Devourer has consumed entire galaxies by overwhelming opposition through sheer numbers. We need to match that capability." The numbers sent a chill through the chamber. The Vorthak Dominion had a population of over 40 billion, but asking even a small percentage to volunteer for transformation would require cultural changes that might take generations to implement. "There's another option," Rodriguez said grimly. "We wait for the Devourer's harvester drones to start the extermination process. Beings who die under those conditions usually return automatically, driven by rage and the desire for vengeance. But the transformation is less stable, and many lose their sanity in the process." "Unacceptable," Archon Kesvel declared. "We will not allow our people to be slaughtered in hopes they might return as useful soldiers." Marcus felt a surge of respect for the Vorthak leader. Despite facing cosmic extinction, she was still concerned about protecting her people's dignity and autonomy. It was a very human perspective, and he wondered if perhaps the two species weren't as different as they'd always believed. "Then we need volunteers," he said, "both species working together, sharing the risks and the sacrifices." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Council members argued about logistics, ethics, and probability calculations, while the Devourer continued its approach toward the inner system. Outside the chamber, Marcus could sense the growing panic among the general population as news of the entity's presence spread. But something else was spreading as well. Through the network connection, he felt returned humans across the galaxy beginning to coordinate their efforts. Ships were moving into position, weapons were being prepared, and contingency plans were being activated. The transformation of both species would take time, but they wouldn't face the initial assault without resources. "I have a proposal," Science Coordinator Melthara said suddenly. "What if we don't wait for volunteers? What if we create a hybrid approach?" She activated her personal display, showing complex genetic and psychological profiles. "Our analysis of the returned humans suggests the transformation is most successful in individuals who possess certain psychological characteristics: willingness to sacrifice, strong emotional connections to others, and the ability to maintain personal identity under extreme stress." "You're talking about screening candidates," Marcus realized. "I'm talking about identifying those who are most likely to survive the process and retain their sanity afterward. If we can increase the success rate from 60% to 90%, we need fewer volunteers to achieve the same result." It was a pragmatic approach that appealed to the Vorthak mindset while addressing human concerns about unnecessary casualties. But it would also require unprecedented cooperation between species that had been enemies for years. "The decision must be made quickly," Sarah warned. "The Devourer's harvester drones have already begun deploying in the outer system. We have perhaps 2 days before they reach inhabited worlds." High Archon Kessesvel stood slowly, her ancient joints creaking with the effort. "Very well. I authorize the establishment of joint transformation facilities on all major worlds. Fleet Commander Thex Man, you will coordinate military preparations. Science Coordinator Melthara, you will oversee the screening and transformation process." She turned to Marcus and his companions. "And you will teach us how to die and return as something capable of fighting cosmic horror. May the ancestors forgive us all for what we're about to become." Elan, the transformation of an entire galactic civilization, was about to begin. and Marcus Chen found himself at the center of the most desperate gamble in the history of sapient life. The first transformation facility established on Sector Prime operated around the clock, converting volunteers from both species into something capable of fighting entities that existed beyond normal reality. Marcus stood in the observation gallery, watching as Vorthak technician Velandra underwent the controlled death process. Below, medical teams monitored her vital signs while returned human specialists guided her consciousness through the spaces between life and death. It had been 18 hours since the High Council's decision, and they had already processed over 300 volunteers. The success rate was encouraging. 87% of candidates successfully completed the transformation and retained their sanity. But time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. Harvester drone contact in Sector 7, Commander Rodriguez reported, his voice echoing through the facility's communication system. They're moving faster than projected. Estimated arrival at the first inhabited planet is now 16 hours. Sarah Mitchell materialized beside Marcus, her form flickering between dimensions as she channeled information from the returned human network. The outer defense fleets are taking heavy casualties. Conventional weapons are completely ineffective against the Harvester drones. Through the facility's windows, Marcus could see the night sky flickering with unnatural lights. Distant explosions marked the destruction of Vorthak ships that had tried to engage the advancing enemy. Each flash represented thousands of lives lost, warriors who had died without understanding what they were fighting. "How many enhanced beings do we have operational?" he asked. 4,000 human, 2,000 Vorthak, Sarah replied. "Not nearly enough for what's coming." On the transformation table below, Velandra's vital signs flatlined completely. For 60 seconds, she remained clinically dead while her consciousness navigated the dimensional spaces that would give her access to powers beyond normal existence. Then her heart began beating again, but the rhythm was different, slower, more deliberate, as if powered by energies that didn't originate in normal space-time. Her eyes opened, reflecting the same strange light that marked all the returned. When she sat up on the table, her movements had the fluid grace that characterized enhanced beings. She looked at her hands, watching as they briefly became translucent, before solidifying again. "The sensation is indescribable," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in ways Vorthak's speech never had before. "I can perceive structures that don't exist in three-dimensional space. It's like seeing color for the first time after a lifetime of blindness." Velandra was the first Vorthak to successfully complete the transformation, and her success would be crucial for convincing others of her species to volunteer. The process was terrifying enough for humans who had some cultural context for concepts like resurrection. For Vorthak, whose religious traditions emphasized the finality of death, it required a complete restructuring of their worldview. "How do you feel?" Dr. Morrison asked. The human physician had been one of the first to volunteer for enhancement, using his medical knowledge to improve the transformation process. "Different, but still myself," Velandra replied. "I can feel connections to others who have undergone this change. It's like being part of a vast organism while maintaining individual identity." Marcus nodded. That was exactly how he experienced the network. A collective consciousness that shared information and coordinated actions, while preserving the unique perspectives of each participant. It was perhaps the most human thing about their transformation. They had found a way to transcend individual mortality without losing their essential selves. An alarm began sounding throughout the facility. The main display activated, showing real-time tactical information from across the star system. The Harvester drones had encountered the first line of defense, a combined fleet of human and Vorthak vessels under the command of enhanced officers. What followed defied everything both species thought they knew about space combat. The returned human ships moved through space like living things, their hulls flowing and reshaping themselves in response to incoming fire. They phased in and out of normal dimensions, appearing behind enemy formations before disappearing into spaces that didn't exist on conventional sensors. Their weapons fired ammunition that seemed to be carved from crystallized void, each impact creating tears in reality itself. But the Harvester drones were equally impossible. They absorbed energy weapons, shrugged off kinetic impacts, and regenerated damage faster than conventional forces could inflict it. Their own weapons fired beams of pure entropy, reducing anything they touched to its component atoms. "We're taking heavy losses," Fleet Commander Thexman reported from his flagship's bridge. His transformation had been completed 6 hours earlier, giving him access to enhanced tactical awareness that allowed him to coordinate actions across multiple dimensions simultaneously. "But we're learning their attack patterns." That was the key insight that had emerged from the first engagements. The harvester drones operated according to programmed behaviors that had been successful against countless species over cosmic time, but they had never faced enemies who could adapt in real time, who could share tactical information instantaneously, and who could literally follow them into the dimensional spaces where they thought they were safe. "Continue the engagement," Sarah ordered. "Every minute of data we gather improves our chances against the main entity." Marcus felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders. Somehow, during the chaos of the past few days, he had become one of the primary coordinators of the defense effort. His transformation had given him access to tactical capabilities he was still learning to use, but more importantly, it had connected him to the collective wisdom of every returned human in the galaxy. Through that connection, he could feel the approaching presence of the Devourer itself. It was still hours away from the inner system, but its influence was already beginning to warp local spacetime. Reality became unstable in its vicinity, with physical laws breaking down and reforming in patterns that hurt to contemplate. "The main entity is beginning active scanning," Commander Park reported from her position in the deep sensor network. "It's analyzing our defensive preparations." "Let it look," Marcus replied. "It's never faced anything like us before." The hours that followed blurred together in a constant stream of tactical updates, transformation procedures, and increasingly desperate preparations. More volunteers arrived at the facilities as word spread about the approaching threat. Many came seeking the power to protect their families. Others were driven by simple desperation, the knowledge that conventional forces had no chance against what was coming. But not all the transformations were successful. The process was inherently traumatic, requiring candidates to face their own mortality and transcend it through sheer force of will. Some died and stayed dead. Others returned, but lost themselves in the process, becoming hollow shells that mimicked enhanced abilities without retaining the consciousness that made them effective. Velandra had become instrumental in convincing her fellow Vorthak to volunteer. Her successful transformation proved that the process wasn't limited to humans, and her continued sanity demonstrated that Vorthak consciousness could survive the transition to enhanced existence. "The key is maintaining focus on what you want to protect," she explained to a group of nervous volunteers. "The transformation will try to strip away everything that defines you as an individual. You must hold on to your core identity, your love for others, your duty to your people, your commitment to defending what matters." As the Devourer drew closer, its influence began affecting the planet itself. Gravity fluctuated randomly, causing objects to fall upward or sideways without warning. Electronics failed as electromagnetic fields twisted into impossible configurations. Most disturbing of all, some areas of the planet began experiencing temporal distortions, with time flowing backward or accelerating beyond comprehension. "The entity is testing our reality's stability, Doctor," Morrison observed. "It's determining how much stress our local spacetime can endure before collapsing." "How long before it reaches optimal position?" Marcus asked. 6 hours, Sarah replied. "Maybe less, if it decides to accelerate." Through the facility's windows, they could see the effects spreading across the capital city. Buildings flickered in and out of existence as dimensional barriers became permeable. Citizens who hadn't undergone transformation moved sluggishly, their nervous systems unable to process the exotic energies flooding their environment. But the enhanced beings were adapting. Both human and Vorthak volunteers found that their transformed physiology allowed them to function normally, despite the reality distortions. They could see through the dimensional barriers, navigate spaces that existed in multiple phases simultaneously, and most importantly, they could perceive the Devourer's true nature. "It's not just a weapon," Velandra realized, as she studied the sensor data. "It's alive. Conscious. It's been studying us for years, learning about our societies and technologies." Marcus felt a chill run through his enhanced nervous system. You're saying it's intelligent? More than intelligent. It's ancient beyond measure, with memories stretching back across cosmic epochs. It remembers every species it has consumed, every world it has devoured, and it's curious about us. That curiosity might be their only advantage. The devourer had encountered billions of sapient species, but none had developed the ability to transcend death and return as something more than they had been. The returned humans and enhanced Vorthak represented an evolutionary leap that had never occurred before in its vast experience. Then we give it something to be curious about, Marcus decided. The final phase of their defense strategy was the most dangerous. Instead of trying to prevent the devourer from reaching the inner system, they would allow it to arrive and begin its harvesting process. But they would be waiting for it in the spaces between dimensions, armed with weapons that could damage entities existing outside normal reality. All transformation facilities report final numbers, Sarah announced. 23,000 enhanced beings ready for deployment. Combined fleet assets moving into position. Marcus felt the network expanding as enhanced beings across the galaxy focused their attention on this single star system. They were no longer individual humans in Vorthak. They had become something new. A hybrid species born from necessity and forged in the crucible of cosmic threat. As the devourer finally emerged into normal space above Sector Prime, reality shuddered. The entity was even more massive than their instruments had indicated, a living planet covered in organs that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. Harvester drones swarmed around it like antibodies, while larger constructs began extending toward the inhabited worlds below. But for the first time in its ancient existence, the devourer faced resistance it hadn't expected. Enhanced beings phased into the same dimensional spaces it occupied, attacking with weapons forged from crystallized void and powered by the spaces between life and death. They fought not just to protect their worlds, but to prove that evolution and adaptation could triumph over entropy and consumption. The battle for the galaxy's future was about to begin, and Marcus Chen stood ready to lead humanity and its new allies into a war that would determine whether sapient life had a future among the stars. They had seemed trapped by death and limitation, but instead they had found transcendence. Now they would discover whether that transcendence was enough to save everything they held dear.